Welcome, everybody. My name is Barry Kassab. I'm the market development for MCA, which is Musicians and Consumer Audio. Welcome, everybody, for our first webinar in the MCA field. Obviously, people are just joining in right now. Probably I'm going to allow just a couple of minutes so people can join in. Since there'll be a lot of people joining in, so I will have to mute all the microphones and the videos as well. This way we can actually just control the room. If there's any questions, we can have them in the chat. So people can always type in the chat whatever they'd like to ask, so we can answer them at the end of the session. I have with me today a very important guest. It is Mr. Fali Demania, and he'll be through the session today. We will have a lot of sharing. He's a very important engineer in the region between India and Middle East. And of course, we'll have a lot of sharing from him. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. We will answer them towards the end. If I didn't mute your mic, please make sure you mute the mic from your side and the video, so we'll not disrupt anybody else. So without further ado, I'd like to start with the introduction. So today's session is all about the most important microphones in anybody's engineer. Between studio, home studios, or even in a live environment. Of course, they are not exactly the same. You can actually start from a small portion and you can expand on top of that. But if you're going to start with this small portion, it can be a certain microphone or a certain collection, let's say. And then just sorry, trying to mute the mics. And then, of course, building up on that, you can expand. So first, I'd like to kind of cover the history of the company. It's just a very brief history. We're going to go down in further details down the webinars later on. We're going to have, of course, like 2 webinars every week, every Monday and Thursday, same time, 4 o'clock. Of course, the link will be shared through the emails and through the registrations every time. So starting with the history of the company is about 95 years old by now. It's a very rich history. It had its major fingerprint in the industry, starting from the earliest days. And it actually had the biggest fingerprint into what we call it today as the modern microphone. Of course, what is a modern microphone? It's every single microphone you find today in anywhere, in a studio, in a home studio, in a live environment, in a boardroom, in a auditorium. All these microphones are called the modern microphones. Now, the birth of the modern microphone had to happen by a company called Shure. They actually had the first approach in changing the microphone from being a very niche, if you like to find the most commonly used word today, which is called a custom made. So it was customized back in the days to be used for whatever purpose they had. So back in the days, let's say after Graham Bell designed the first, let's say, dynamic based microphone, which was called the carbon composite. The carbon composite microphone was required that time just to be able to deliver an electrical signal over a wire. Later on, this microphone was optimized by Graham Bell as well to be used in orchestras. So people wanted to hear orchestras over the phone line, something similar to what we're doing today. Like today, we're doing a webinar online due to the current situation that people have to stay at home. So people used to listen to orchestras the same way, which was equivalent to what we have today as a live streaming, but people used to do it on the phone line. So the microphones were used that time was also a carbon composite, but was made or custom made for that purpose. You cannot go commercially and buy that from anywhere. Even back in the days, what we call today as a commercial or retail possibility was not even doable. You need to go through different layers of either writing a correspondence, a mail, or trying to reach through a phone call to buy a certain product. Later on in the early 30s, Shure designed the first unidirectional microphone, and we call it even the first moving coil unidirectional microphone. And that was the change in the whole history of microphones, because before that, microphones were omnidirectional. And when I say omnidirectional, that means it picks up the sound from anywhere. Now, the microphone is in front of me here. If I try to turn it away from me, there'll be a drop in the signal. And now you're barely hearing me as clearly as when the microphone is directed to me. So that means this microphone is directional. It has a directivity. So before that, microphones were not directional. So that means it was very hard to even control, very hard to even have any kind of elimination of feedback, which is that kind of the ping or the oscillation that happens because of the microphones, that people kind of get used to that. In most of the movies, every time there's a microphone, or they call it a microphone drop, there should be a feedback associated with it because they just got used to this. But the birth of the unidirectional microphone started to eliminate that. So the feedback, which is the sound coming from the source back into the microphone again, started to be eliminated. And with that, the early microphones in the days was known to be the Super 55. A lot of people can recognize it as a classic microphone. This little boy down here. That was the rebuild of that microphone into a slightly smaller version. So everybody who thinks the classic microphone is just like this, actually it is a Shure microphone. And Shure were the first to bring the microphone into something into that shape. A side note to that shape, by the way, this grill on the front was actually coming from something a lot of people might recognize if they go on Google Images and search for the Oldsmobile. So Sidney and Shure, which was a founder of the company, had an Oldsmobile that I was quite proud of. And the front grille of the car was something I was very happy as well about, which he kind of got the idea from. So the idea of the front grille of the microphone came from the Oldsmobile. Just a second, trying to mute mics and videos so we can keep things quiet and nice and easy. So continuing again, the Super 55 was one of the first microphones that was unidirectional in history. The reversioning of that, which came after the start of the TV stations or the TV broadcast, because before the Super 50 was like quite big and bulky, it would cover half of the face of the singer, could be the news anchor or whoever he is on TV. So they made the smaller version, which was the 55S, which means small, and that was, of course, known as the Elvis Presley afterwards microphone that a lot of people recognize today. So briefly here, we can see that Shure is very old in the industry, and it kind of laid the foundation of the microphones. Even what we know today as the ice cream cone or the lollipop-shaped microphone, that was also built by Shure. If anybody knows Freddie Mercury or watched the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, the microphone that was used down there, which is the 565, that was his signature microphone that time. It's not made for him, but that was the microphone that he used mostly. So that was the foundation of what we know today as the SM58. Now, moving from all of that history today is that there is not even a single performance that you see on stage or on TV. Anytime you see a microphone on TV or on stage, there should be at least one Shure microphone there. I don't want to say that 90% is Shure microphone, but obviously in most of the times when is the honeycomb, the ice cream cone shaped microphone, the handheld type, or the SM58. This is actually customized with the UAE flag, but it's the same SM58. So anytime there is a microphone of that shape, most of the time it's a Shure SM58. And as we said, that shape was actually made by Shure. They never just copyrighted it. So everybody made the same shape. And people just think that, yeah, microphones look like this. But the reason it looks like this is because of Shure themselves. They actually started that shape. We will have a dedicated webinar talking about the internal build of the microphones, how our microphones are special versus a lot of the microphones out in the market. We'll talk about this in details and in more, let's say, under the cover. But for now, we just enjoy that nice color as it is here. Keep it in the background. There is not even a single studio today that doesn't have a Shure microphone of any kind. I can go through some of them myself, and I'll elaborate a little bit about each microphone and why are they rated to be that important in every studio or in any recording space as well. Like home studios are becoming bigger these days. Obviously, with the situation right now, a lot of people are actually investing into their home studios, trying to make let's say a better facility down there. A lot of the music ideas can be executed right now. I'm sitting in my personal home studio right now, which is an example of some home studios. So without further ado, I'd like to start with the most important microphone to most of the studios, and it can be with the same microphone that we talked about, which is the SM58. Now, why is it that important? I mentioned a few of the reasons right now is that it is, without any competition, the most famous vocal microphone in every stage worldwide. There is no stage that you can go on that doesn't have an SM58. And that means that having an industry standard microphone like this makes it very important for you to have a glimpse or have a feel of how you can translate into a live situation. So let's say if I'm a vocalist and I'm starting, let's say, my early days in practicing vocals, I'm trying to sing covers, sing some songs, and sometime you'll go on stage and perform. So if I'm performing on stage with a completely different microphone than SM58, I might have a second thought. But when you know that most of the stages would have an SM58, then it's a good idea to actually practice with the most commonly used microphone on stage. So an SM58 would make it a perfect example. The other reason is that this microphone would sound great no matter how your signal chain is. It has the basic foundation of making your voice sound right wherever you go. Not because it's magic, not because it has a very secret design or something like this, but the way it's designed scientifically was taking the consideration of the human voice and what a human voice requires. Now, naturally, if we're going to talk about the human voice bandwidth in terms of frequency, and when I say frequency bandwidth, for those who don't understand what frequency bandwidth is that when I talk about light, for example, what we see in front of us in all the colors is called the visible light. Now, are there invisible frequencies or invisible lights that we cannot see? Yes. Do we need to see them? Most probably no. If we need that, then our eyes would have been accommodating these. Now, in audio, what we can call them the sonic range in audio is between 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Now, this is the extreme limits. So the doctors assume that when a newborn baby comes out to life, that new human being can hear from 20 hertz up to 20 kilohertz. And by the time you're exposed to more noises and noise pollution, you'll be unable to see that anymore. or unable to hear to these limits anymore. So that starts to diminish from the edges. But most of the people, if I can call it on average, would be able to hear from a good 25 to 30 up to 15 to 16 kilohertz. So these are the extreme limits. And honestly speaking, if you can hear from 30 to 16 kilohertz, your ears are wonderful. Doesn't mean you are losing anything or not. I personally try to do a few tests on my own ears as well, and I could hear up to 17.5 on a good days. And sometimes if I've been exposed to loud noises, that can go down to 15 kilohertz or something. But in the last 10 to 15 years, I made sure that I always have earplugs whenever I go to a loud place to protect my hearing. So the human voice, let's say my voice, as an example, is in the range of about 400 hertz to about 6 kilohertz. That is the range that is usable range. Of course, this sibilance is up to 10 kilohertz. So when I say S's, like a C, like an S, like a T, the high frequency that comes in those letters, these can go up to 10 kilohertz. So what happens if people can remember the old-fashioned phone, I can mimic that by doing a cave or like doing a cone around my mouth. So I start talking like this, and I start saying like full or fire or higher or shire. All these sound kind of the same because of the lacking the high frequency. So if people remember the switch between the 2G to 3G on their phones, suddenly the sound quality on the phones became better. You start able to hear a lot much better until somebody goes into a zone where the coverage is slightly less, so the bandwidth has to shrink down and go back to the 2G again, and then the sound quality kind of goes back to the old-fashioned phones that we remember. But still, it is usable for human voice. But if I'm talking about an instrument, like an acoustic guitar or like a violin, this is not usable. It makes it sound really bad. It doesn't even sound like the instrument anymore. The violin might sound like something similar to a trumpet or maybe something even worse. So that means the usable bandwidth for these instruments is wider. For the human voice, again, the range, which is between 400 hertz up to 10 kilohertz, I can say, that is the most usable if I'm talking about the high fidelity. If I'm talking about doing a conversation over the phone, pretty much 400 hertz to 4 kilohertz is more than enough. Now, why, again, the SM58 is the most adequate? Because it actually has a very good coverage up to 15 kilohertz. It has a very minor boost on the high frequency, which makes the human voice sound more pleasant on the microphones. Now, in the future webinars, we're going to have more demos in which we can actually do a quick microphone shootout. Not only on vocals, we can actually do a microphone shootout also on instruments. So this is going to come down the line in more details. So I invite everybody in this webinar today to stay tuned for the next webinars. We'll have more dedicated webinars about bits and pieces and how to mic or miking positions. What are the optimal positions? Why do we choose those versus something else? Of course, my guest Fali today will have his part in elaborating more on his part when it comes to live environments as a front of house engineer. So also stay tuned for today since he's going to be talking his experience and sharing it with everybody down here. Now, moving forward, what is the next microphone that we'd like to keep in our studios and that would be quite useful? I'm quite sure if we have guitarists in the room here that they would recognize the second microphone. And definitely it is the SM58, it's SM57, I'm sorry. I keep mixing between these two because under the hood they are the same. But there's a slight difference to them, and I'll explain it right now using the nice and famous SM58, which is colorful. So why is the SM57 is known to guitarists? And why is it important to be in the studios? again, it's one of the industry standard microphones that is or has been used, and it's even in most of the recording softwares today. So anybody who got a software that simulates amplifiers or let's say has a cabinet or guitar cab section, if you drop down the menu and find the selection of microphones, it's impossible not to find the 57 written down there. Of course, for many reasons, a lot of these softwares would not write the full name of the microphone as in SM57. They only just put a 57 there because of copyright reasons, number one. Number two is that they don't want to go into any legal issues. But musicians already know that a 57 is what they refer to as the SM57 that is used with most recordings back in history until today. The SM57 is exactly the same cartridge that is used in 58. That's why, for some reason, I keep mixing up these, because in every session I have to mention these two. The main difference between these two, if I look at this microphone after removing the grill, this cartridge, which is called the Unidyne 3, which is an update of the Unidyne 1 that I mentioned earlier, that was made for the Super 55 or the unidirectional 55. So Unidyne 3 is an updated version of that has a more, let's say it's a kind of a very quiet shock mount. And if I remove the grill, it becomes a 57 because of the proximity and the amount of high frequency that this grill can eliminate. So obviously, if you have a 58 and you remove the grill, it is the closest to a 57. But the cartridge inside is exactly the same. Now, the SM57 and the SM58, they are dynamic microphones. We're going to talk about the difference between dynamic microphones and other microphones like condenser microphones or ribbon microphones in the next few webinars. But generally, dynamic microphones can handle high SPL. And when I say high SPL, that means high sound pressure level, which means loud sources. And obviously, everybody knows that guitars can be pretty loud. The humble amp, usually tube amps, can produce between 30 to 50 watts. Large heads, I mean, this is an example down here, that's 100 watts. 100 watts can literally hurt your ears drastically. Still, you can put an SM57 or a 58 in front of the cab and record it to perfection without any distortion. So one of the main reasons why an SM57 is quite important to be in a studio is that, for the same reasons we mentioned the 58, is that you need to have an idea on how your home recordings or your studio recordings is going to translate into an industry standard kind of sound, which is in most of the records. So most of the records, they used SM57 in their recordings, so it will be adequate to have that mic in your portfolio. Now, moving forward from the 57 on, what is the next mic that you can have in your studio? I would suggest then to move slightly away from dynamic microphones and go into condenser microphones. Now, the first condenser microphone that I would think about that everybody should have, which kind of completes the whole circle at least, which would be the SM27. SM27 is a condenser microphone. It's a side address microphone. So when I say side address microphone, you don't hold it like this. You should hold it from the side. So holding it from the side, that means the sound is coming from the side of the microphone and not from the top. But talking about a microphone like this, I have to speak to the microphone directly this way. So this is not a side address microphone, which is the SM7B here. Now, why do I like the SM27? And I think it's important to be in a studio for many reasons. Reason number one, it can handle high SPLs, and that is quite important. So it's not like you can take it for granted, like you can do the same thing with the dynamic microphone that you can do with this microphone, but it still, to a certain extent, can handle a very loud SPL. or loud sound. The other reason is that it has good controls to eliminate the low frequency or low frequency noise that might be in a room. So a lot of the rooms doesn't have a good sound treatment. And when I say good sound treatment, that it might sound a bit boomy or echoey. A good example would be when you're talking in the bathroom, that kind of the howling sound in the bathroom is because of the echo or reflections in the room. So if you're trying to record in a home studio and you don't have a lot of sound treatment, then you need a microphone that can give you a good sensitivity in some range, but also being able to eliminate certain frequencies that would be not likely to have in your recording, which is a high pass filter. So this mic has two roll-off frequencies in which you can use to eliminate your low frequencies. We'll talk about those in details in the further webinars as well. And it also has a pad. A pad means it can eliminate some of the sensitivity on this microphone. So if I reduce the sensitivity of the microphone, it gives you more room to push the source. So if I make my microphone less sensitive, and I know that I can project my voice pretty loud, then that's even better. So that means whatever noise in the room, I would be able to eliminate, and then I will keep my voice at the front. So it's kind of adding more contrast. It's like the difference between black and white. So if your black is becoming blacker and not a tad of gray, this is what you like it to be. The other thing is that this microphone is not totally flat, so that makes it nice on some acoustic guitars. So when you buy your acoustic guitar and it's still brand new and the wood hasn't really aged well, the low frequency range on that is not still like, or doesn't sound like a guitar that's been for, let's say, 7 or 8 or 9 years old. So what happens is that this microphone adds a little bit of color on that instrument that makes it sound a bit warmer. But finally, it's a perfect voiceover microphone and a podcast microphone. So what happens when you have this mic plus the other two microphones, you kind of covered most of the situations. You have a good universal vocal microphone, and then you have the 57, which is a good guitar microphone, and then you have the 27, which is, I can call it a general purpose microphone, perfect for acoustic guitars, perfect for even miking cabs and guitars if you're not pushing the amp way too much, and for vocals and podcasts. You can actually even look it online and you find many different applications that people use these microphones for. So even if this microphone is called a vocals side address microphone, this is not written in stone. This is definitely the most straightforward application for this microphone. But then how can you use that for? Sky's the limit. You can even experiment and you can discover some other ways to use this microphone. If you have a pair of those, you can even use them as overheads. Why not? It works. My list of microphones can really go furthermore, but I wanted to keep it simple and just straightforward, as in what would be the most important ones that you need to go for if you're having a home studio, if you're having anything as a startup. Now, if you want to go into advanced microphones, as in what you need to have in the medium-sized studio onwards, there are plenty of microphones. But personally, there is one microphone that I'd like to mention here that is, in my opinion, that can be a game changer, or it is quite versatile, that went beyond my imagination. And there was not even a single time I used this microphone and it let me down. The microphone is the Beta 181. Now, jumping right away into a Beta series might be a bit too much, but as I said, I mean, if you have an intermediate or advanced studio, in my opinion, this is a microphone that is a must-have. So a little bit of a unboxing here. I know people like unboxing, but that's a partial part of it. So this microphone is very much a lollipop shape. It is a side address microphone, so I cannot use it this way. I use it this way. It has an interchangeable capsule, so I can remove the capsule. This is the capsule right now here, and this is the preamp part. So this mic comes with 4 polar patterns. It comes with a standard cardioid, supercardioid, figure 8, and omnidirectional. And by the way, just for the side note, supercardioid doesn't mean supercharged. Supercardioid is not better than cardioid, so keep that away. Supercardioid is just a name, just like some guy, his middle name is Super for some reason, but doesn't mean he's a Superman. We'll talk about that in details when we talk about the polar patterns and what makes a microphone different than the other. Now, the reason why I like this microphone, it has all the characteristics that a pencil microphone does, like the ones that you use usually in overheads or in hi-hats or in cymbals or even recording acoustic guitars. But the idea that it's a side address is a game changer, which means I can put it in the smallest areas where it gets really, really hard to put a microphone on a stand. So let's imagine a situation where you have a drum kit, and some of the drummers have their setup usually standard, but some drummers have a very different setup. Some of them have the hi-hat really close to the snare. Not only this, you find the tom right on top of the snare, which leaves a very small triangle between the tom, the hi-hat, and the snare. If you try to put any microphone there, it will come in the way. You put a 56, a Beta 56, it's too big. If you put a 57, it's even bigger. If you try to put any kind of microphone, it's still big. If you try to put a 98 and try to put it down there, yes, it works, but what happens is that you need to extend it to the front, and what happens sometimes the drummer would even hit the mic and you have a glitch in your recording. You have to start over again. The nice thing about this microphone is that that part only needs to be exposed. So if this is the snare here, that part is enough to be there. It's impossible to hit it because otherwise your drummer is hitting the top rim or hitting the tom and the snare at the same time. So it's literally in the most dead space on the kit. Nevertheless, it sounds amazing on snares or toms. I've had experiments with miking a snare only from the bottom with this microphone, and I got amazing results. It surpassed my expectations. I had one on the top, one on the bottom. I ended up using only one on the bottom. Even the top was not required. Naturally, the dynamics was just right to mic the snare from the bottom with a single 181 supercardioid. So a pair of those can shift your work massively. It's without any competition that this microphone is completely different than any other microphone I've used in my history as an engineer. So this microphone, in my opinion, is one of the microphones that an intermediate studio or advanced studios should have. It will not let them down by any chance. So this is the collection that I'd like to talk about personally. But if you want to go slightly and open the doors right now and go to an open, nice, massive place with lots of crowds and lights and stages and big bands, I think there is a more adequate person to talk about this. So I'd like to leave the floor to my colleague from India. He's part of the Shure team, a very fresh and a very, I can say, very important addition to the team. He comes from the live environment, a guy that spends at least 4 to 5, sometimes 6 gigs a month. He comes from the live environment, so he's a live sound engineer. He works for a very important artist in India. For those who know him, his name is A.R. Rahman. For those who don't know him, he's a touring artist. He's been to many places around the world. I'd like to introduce him to be on the floor right now to speak about the most important microphones between the large studios and live environment. So, Fali, the floor is yours.
Hey, hey.
Yes,
Hey. Yep. Can
I
you hear
can
me
hear you
now?
now. Yes.
Lovely.
Finally. Okay.
Suffice to say, if that ever happened during a show, I'd get fired.
Well, luckily it's not a show, but
Yeah.
at least it's good to have you here. So yeah, I
Awesome.
was
Thanks for having me.
no worries. I was briefing people about how I met you for the first time in the monitoring summit. So
Right.
you
Right.
can continue from here, and then you can move forward. So at least the story is not interrupted.
Awesome. Awesome. So yeah, guys, happy to be here. And I've worked as a live sound engineer for many, many years. I now work with Shure in the South Asia region, and I'm from Mumbai. Well, I just wanted to. I do a lot of live work with Mr. A.R. Rahman, who's an Oscar and Grammy winner, and some of the mics that I personally carry in my kit for pretty much any gig. The first one is for the Beta 91. I think that mic just goes with me wherever I go. Uh, in fact, I have it right here. So if you guys can see this, this is the microphone. Yeah, so this is probably not probably. This is definitely the first Shure microphone I ever bought. So, and it's just I won't. If there's one thing that I take for a rock kind of gig, this one is the microphone. It's just superlative on kick drums, on anything that requires a low end thump. It just sounds outstanding. Outstanding. The others that we use are we have a pair of KSM 32s, which we use as overheads. Again, it's just a stellar microphone to pretty much capture everything, and it almost sounds like it should be far more expensive than it actually is. It sounds like a microphone that should cost you probably 3 or 4 times the amount. It just sounds outstanding. And we've tried it on various things from, sitar to tabla in the studio to when we go outside, overhead for drums. In a situation where, you don't have monitors that are too loud, you can even bring that microphone outside. Not a problem at all. The other one, the other few microphones that we use very often are obviously the Beta 98, the DS version, and that does all our work from toms, snares, Indian percussion, a lot of Western percussion, along with an A56D clamp, and you can pretty much put it on any percussive kind of instrument. Sounds really outstanding. We even started using it on, as of a few months ago, we've actually replaced our SM57 with a Beta 98 DS. And we were quite surprised with what that little tiny capsule can do. Really sounds outstanding. So yeah, these three mics are what we usually carry with us. What I carry with me. This is part of my personal collection.
Nice. So Fali, you mentioned I think you mentioned the second microphone that you use on the sitar, which was again
KSM 32.
the KSM32. So the
Yeah.
KSM32, you know that this mic is a flat microphone, correct?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've mentioned the SM27 just a while ago, which physically looks the same thing as like, a nice side address. I don't know if it looks
Right.
like anything else in the house. Probably a
Right.
nice comb or maybe a nice pillow. But yeah, internally there's a big difference. I mean, as I said earlier, this has a bit of a color on it. It has a bit of a
Right.
boost on the high frequency, while the 32 is a
Right.
flat microphone. But as a
Right.
live engineer, knowing that the microphone is flat, how do you deal with that on stage when you change the source? I mean,
You know,
when do you use a flat microphone versus a colored microphone?
a lot of the times I just like to, especially if I'm trying a new mic, I like to go up and just listen to the source as it is. I want to just listen to the source as it is. So if it's a sitar, if it's a tabla, I just want to go on stage, sit next to the guy playing it, and listen to the instrument. And then we get into the procedure of what mic to use. So we'll kind of change mics sometimes, and whichever one actually sounds closest to what I heard on stage without much EQ from a console side is the mic we end up choosing. And the reason for that is the reason is twofold. Firstly, every time on a console, every time that you go to EQ, you actually play with phase. And I prefer not doing that. I prefer very minor cuts as far as EQ goes, but I like the source and the mic to do, I'd say 90% of the work. As far as flat frequency response, at the moment we are all on in-ear monitors, so it doesn't really affect us with feedback if we were to use stage monitors and stuff like that. But oh, we have a friend. But yeah, I mean, the KSM32 is an absolute go for sitar. Absolutely no question. It's probably one of the best mics you'll hear recreating sitar.
Nice. And speaking about sitar as an instrument, I mean, I've heard quite a difference. Some of them that are sounding full and nice when they are old, but when they're fairly new, they don't have that
Yeah,
low end frequency response. How do you
yeah,
get around
yeah,
getting the low frequency response from an instrument that is fairly new? I usually like to use a colored mic in that case, which can restore a bit of
yeah.
the low end.
The
Uh,
low end, yeah.
do you have yeah, do you have anything that you can bring into the audience that let's say one of your
You
tricks, one
know,
of the stuff from the
yeah,
book?
you know, like still for a lot of Indian classical instruments, it's, I mean, most of them will still go to an SM58 first. They just say it just sounds super warm, and if they want more body, they bring the mic closer because of add a little proximity effect. So even instruments like there's a very famous santoor player in India. I mean, I've tried every single mic on this planet probably for him, and he comes back, no, I want an SM58. And SM58, I don't want any EQ, just turn it up, give me as much level before feedback, and that's it. Don't do anything else. It's so common. So usually we add a little dynamic mic just to bring out a little more bigness sometimes. And we'll use like a very common combination also is the SM81 along with a beta 58, along with an SM58, and we'll tape the two mics together, and have both of them pointing at the source together. It's a very common trick to do that. Very common to do that on snare drums as well when you want to bring out a little more body. So you have a condenser to do the top end stuff, and you have a dynamic to do a little more low end and low body work. A few times that we've done this, it's been again an SM81 and an SM57 taped up together, pointing at the center of the snare, and you almost don't require a snare bottom mic anymore. And that's actually before
Nice.
we discovered before I used the 181, and that was done. There's no going back from that one.
So it was a game changer for you as well.
Game changer, no question, no question.
Wow.
It's ridiculous what a mic of that size can actually reproduce. You'd assume that it wouldn't be as big, and you'd assume that it would sound rather small, but in fact, it's just the opposite. Um, yeah, it's ridiculous. If I had a whole bunch, I'd use that on my toms, on pretty much everything. It's really a incredible microphone.
I had the mutual feeling at the beginning, but I thought I was overdriven by my own temptation. But I'm glad to hear that from somebody else.
Yeah, no,
So,
it's outstanding.
yeah, it is. A small question here, just to kind of elaborate on the phase. I'm
Mhm.
quite sure some of the audience would know what the phase alignment is or phase different is. but I'm quite sure there are some people who never knew about it. I was one of the people who never knew
Yeah.
about phasing in audio. I knew about it in electronics. You
Right.
put something out of phase,
Right.
you cancel it. That's it.
Right.
But
Right.
a partial phasing issue, and how does that affect audio? So if you may elaborate on that in a live environment, or how
Right.
can an audience perceive phasing issues? How do they feel it?
Um, the easiest way to perceive phase is if, say, as a part of an audience, you stand up during a show and start walking to either side. So consider that the stage and the PA system is in front of you, and now you've gotten up maybe to go and get yourself something to eat, and you're now walking towards the food stall. And suddenly your ears will start to perceive a little, um, it, just to describe it plainly, something's not going to sound right as you keep walking. Uh, your ears are now perceiving phase. So it's something very similar on a much lower level, but it's something quite similar that happens when you start to EQ musical instruments quite drastically. And when you have like a band of 100 odd inputs, and you've got tons of EQ going on everything, to an extent, you will, as an engineer, also you start to now notice you notice things like headroom starting to go away, especially in the top end. A lot of that has to do with phase, especially if it's EQing a lot of instruments which are very close together, like toms. That's one main area where you can perceive phase very easily.
And how do you counter that by eliminating those frequencies or reducing sensitivity as in gain?
Um, Usually eliminating, but very little. I mean, I'd prefer the first perceivable way to do that is to actually pan stuff slightly off. So let's go back to the example of drums, for example. Um, if you're miking an entire drum kit with 5 or 6 microphones and you have everything running down the center, you will start to perceive phase because all those microphones are now interacting with each other. Moment you start panning them out just a bit, some of that perceived phase starts to go away. So you start pulling in a little more body, especially into like a floor tom versus kick drum versus what your overheads, etc., are doing. So very often, more than changing sensitivity or EQing, sometimes it can just be a matter of panning it outside the center, just moving stuff out of the center a little bit. Gives you two things: gives you a little more headroom in the center, so where your vocals can sit a little better, and this perceived phase interaction also starts to reduce. So
Nice.
before doing anything else, I'd probably just pan stuff out of the center. If it was in the center, I'd pan stuff out of the center.
Perfect. So it's always about the vocals. More me in my monitor.
Hey mate, it depends on who's paying the bills. If your check's been written by the main guy, your vocal needs to be up there. So
Absolutely.
it's that's the job. I mean, as much as I like listening to drums and rock guitar, but the drummer or the guitarist is not paying my fee. So it's that's just how
Yeah,
it is.
yeah. It's just a side joke here. Yeah, I mean, uh, probably one of the biggest struggles usually on stage is the vocals because the dynamic range on the vocals is very limited versus a drums or a guitar or something
Yeah,
like this. And
yeah.
a lot of people when they sound check all the instruments, and when it gets to the vocals, this part gets a bit difficult. Is that you find that you're already squashed out of power in your PA system.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, having room for the vocals is quite important as well. Um,
Oh, no question.
yes, absolutely. Um, I just before we open the ground for questions, um, I'd like to hear from you about your experience with a very unique microphone that is kind of a new kid on the block, which is the KSM8.
Yeah.
Uh, I know that everybody knows the SM58 as the go-to vocal microphone.
Yeah.
Personally, I mean, in the past 3 years when I joined the company, I would not go out on a gig without carrying a KSM8 with me. I mean, this is my personal go-to mic. Now, would I recommend it or not in the studio? I will try to kind of hold my guts and kind of not be biased and say you might not need it, but if you leave me to say speak my heart and say, man, if you don't have a KSM8, you are doomed. But again, I'd like to hear from somebody else. How does the KSM8 stand up in your arsenal of microphones?
As live sound engineers, we're some of the people that are most resilient to change. Like if something works, and for us in the past, it was a standard Shure wireless mic with a Beta 58 capsule. Like, yeah, why change? It works. The artist is happy. And I think the day um, we shifted Mr. Rahman to a KSM 8, it was just like, you know, I don't know. It's difficult to describe. It's difficult to describe. It's pretty much what the SM58 was so many years ago. It's reinventing something as iconic like that. Uh, I think the reinvention of the SM58 back in the day, in today's time, in my opinion, would be the KSM8. It's just got a sonic signature that is, it's really difficult to put your foot on, but you just peek into it, and it's outstanding. It's yeah, it's you have to experience it to believe it, and we've now started shifting a lot of the artists that we work with to KSMA, and it's the first thing that they come back telling us is, hey guys, every time we sing, our voice starts to sound really boomy, and then we've got a high pass, tons of that out, and now all of a sudden, like yeah, it's wherever I sing, whatever I do, it's absolutely clear. And what's new, what's different, what are you guys doing? And we're like, we're not doing anything other than what we do every day. It's just that we've changed the capsule for your microphone, and I think that's enough. It's I've till now used it only on vocals, but Barry, I believe you were saying it can be used on a lot of on other instruments, guitar cabinets as well.
I've personally used it on guitar cabs. I always wanted to try it on guitar cabs until I actually did, and I was really surprised with the results. It's
Right.
it's very unorthodox to find a microphone like a KSM8 used for guitar cabs, but I think it's the same thing that you find a mic like there are lots of other expensive microphones out in the industry made by other companies as well, and you find them used for guitar cabs for some reason. But I always wanted to use that. When I saw the frequency response on this microphone, it was kind of pushing
Yeah.
me that why shouldn't it work? And I've actually tried it right here inside this booth, which will actually do that in one of our webinars. So I have kind of a robotic system that kind of move the microphone the way I'd like it without going in the booth, changing it, coming back again. So I had the amp here, I had my guitar here, and I had my app on the phone. I started moving the mic and I'm playing with the microphone, and I got amazing results. I was very surprised with how versatile this microphone can be. But I cannot be the prophet in my own town. It's good to hear things from somebody else. But definitely we will do a dedicated webinar for these microphones, and then I'm more than happy to hear feedback from the audience here on how do they perceive the audio. I hope everybody will be able to hear the audio clearly and be able to identify. There are more microphones as well in the portfolio that we would test aside from what we mentioned today. Today we wanted to go for the first go-to microphones. What are the ones that we would mention in the first meeting? If I met you for the first time, I want to talk, some geeky talk about microphones. Definitely these microphones will be on the list. Now, if you start asking me details on what you want furthermore, how can you get that particular sound or that particular, tonal characteristics of an instrument, of course, the list will definitely change. Uh, but yeah, again, if I want to go for my guts and my feelings, I would actually even start with a KSM8. You might get away with everything with a KSM8, but uh, I think I'm pushing the limits this way a bit. Maybe yes, maybe not. But I'll leave it to you guys. I'm 100% sure that you can go on YouTube and you can check plenty of shootout microphones with the KSM8, and I'm 100% sure that you'll be blown by the results. I was one of them actually. I was not believing what I'm hearing when I was hearing this microphone. My first experience, just to close this, was with a band that was opening for Guns N' Roses in UAE. The band is called Point of View. Maybe some people know it. If people don't know, you can actually find it on YouTube. I was a front of house engineer for Point of View, and unfortunately, that night the band did not allow us to do a sound check. So some bands usually would allow you to do a sound check. Some bands would not allow you to do a sound check. You cannot argue with this. You cannot, you know, you cannot shout. You cannot yell. You cannot do anything. And they were actually quite generous. They told us, by the way, you can sound check only on cans, which means on headphones. And I was like, yeah, but I want to hear the PA. Anyway, I went behind my guts about how most PAs sound like. Uh, I've worked with many PAs. L-Acoustics could be one of the most famous ones. Most of the engineers would have worked with them. They kind of know to some extent how they would sound like. So everything on my desk was done according to the mics that we used commonly. Nevertheless, the KSM8 was the first time used on the vocals. And I had a little bit of compression on the microphones because I know the vocals behavior and the low notes and the high notes. Just story short, of course, we'll have a dedicated webinar about compressors and why do we use compressors. When the gig started and we started blindly, and I just like, I hope it sounds good. It was like pretty much like this. It was like a gamble. Luckily, 90% it was all good. All I needed was just to put the effects back for the vocals, which is the delay and reverb, just to give him the ambience. And then I started feeling that I need a bit more vocals. So I started playing with the compression. So reducing the compression, which is, limiting the loudness of the microphone on where is the ceiling of that microphone. So it was kind of a limiting compressor at that time. So I kept reducing the compressor until in the end I just bypassed it completely. And then the whole show was run with a KSM8 without compression. That was the first time I was using it. I was blown by how a microphone can have such dynamics without a lot of processing done on the desk. While previously with SM58 with that vocalist, I had to use a little bit of compression with them so I can have a good balance between the low notes and the high notes with the normal singing and the loud singing at some verses of the songs and so on and so forth. And since then, I was like, that got me in. And I started researching more and more about the microphone until it got me completely into or captivated by what this microphone can do. And as I said earlier, I would not go to any show without this microphone at all. So this was this was like, to me, the wrap of today's webinar or episode. I'd like to open the floor. People can type their questions in the chat box. You can find it next to the number of people. So anybody with questions can feel free to type in their questions there, and we'll try as much as possible to answer them. If you need me to answer them or you want Fali to answer them, you can just type that in the question and say, this question goes to Fali, type in your question. So floor is yours. Anybody wants to ask any questions? So until people start to ask questions, Fali, do you have any closing statement that you'd like to share?
I just So happy to be on this webinar with you today and speak to the people that are on here. Um, I I don't see any questions yet, but I'm I just hope everyone's taking care, and I understand that Dubai is in a bit of a situation as well right now. So take care of your families, and I hope everything gets back to normal pretty soon. And yeah, until then, if you have any, please reach out to Barry. He's one of the most knowledgeable guys I know in this when it comes to microphones and other than microphones, also guitars and guitar amps and music tech. He's outstanding. So yeah, definitely reach out to him with stuff, with queries.
Thank you very much,
We have a question,
Fali.
Barry. Yeah.
Here we go. Let's see. So the question here says, I've sworn by SM81 or the last
15 years.
Overheads. Yes. Wow. Generally used. Should I be looking at some more? So that's a very good question. The first thing I would ask anybody when somebody says, how can I go further beyond a certain microphone? What can I get more from a certain microphone? I think a good example, what we've been talking about right now, let's say as a difference between the KSM8 as a vocal microphone and the traditional SM58. Does that mean the SM58 is not as good as the as the KSM8? I'll be very I'm very wrong if I say KSM8 is straightforward better than SM58. Honestly, in a small stage, you shoot yourself in the foot if you use a KSM8. You need to use a more standard mic like a Beta 58 or SM58. Now, is it better for a certain circumstances? And I'd like always to mention what is the situation that you want this microphone to be used for. So you're saying that you use SM81 as an overheads for the last 15 years. I would say that that is perfect as it is. But if there's some certain details you're looking for that an SM81 is not picking up, and that usually comes in a certain genre. So, and also a drummer. I mean, if you get a drummer who's bashing kit like no tomorrow, I would say, hey man, stick to the SM81, even go for a 57. Even the 81 is gonna cry. But if you get a jazz drummer who has a very good dynamics, then maybe you can stretch it to the KSM 137. Then you can get more articulation other than the SM81. But it is not one size fits all. But what I encourage everybody to do, give your ears a chance to audition any of these microphones anytime you can. I know some of them might not be easy to find sometimes due either to affordability or due to the dealer you're dealing with or the outlet. And this is something I can actually stress about, is that maybe I can take a chance right now to talk about our role in the market, me and Fali here. A market development associate from Shure is the interface between people like you and the company. So if you ask me this question in person and you call me, he's like, hey, Barry, I've been using the 81 for the past these years, 15 years, even 20 years. And I'm looking for something that can do X, Y, or Z. With the drummer like this, you share a video with me or you share me or you tell me about it, then I'll be more than happy to tell you, hey, listen, you know what? Take a pair of a KSM 137. I'll provide them to you. Take them for a week, try them in the studio or in your next gig, and then come back to me and tell me what you felt. And then definitely you would tell me, you know, when I was using the 81, I was getting this, and when I use the 137, I'm getting that. And this is something I personally felt when I was trying things differently. And yeah, if you want that sizzle to be like nice and sweet, no distortion on the top, by all means, yeah. But again, if your drummer is going to bash the hi-hats, you're not going to be happy about it. You find yourself trying to reduce your high frequencies or use a multiband compressor. We're going to talk about these in details later on. So whoever didn't understand what a multiband compressor is, don't feel sad. I was one of them. So absolutely, by all means, you want to try the KSM-137, be my guest. Uh, you even have an option of trying the SM-137. I think it's still in the market as well. It is close enough. I mean, the preamp is different, but the build is very close. So it could be a step. Yep. Thank you for a question. Very good question. Anybody else has any question? Here we go. From the stage. So KSM-8 is great for front of house engineer, but can be a bit troublesome with the number of them on stage for the monitor engineer when mixing with wedges. Okay. Okay, that is a very, very good question. I think Fally here has an answer to this. Fally loves wedges on stage. Okay, Fally, we cannot hear you.
My motto
Okay,
is if it ain't broke, don't try and fix it. That's the first thing. So if 58s work in a very loud, I think that's the special thing about the 58 and the 57. You can get really loud on stage with wedges before you start having trouble. And I think that's what really got them famous back in the day, because there were no in-ear monitors at that point. You had rock and roll bands bashing it out on stage, 108, 110 dB SPL on stage, and you have a vocalist singing through an SM58. That's where. So if you have a situation where stage is really really loud and you're struggling with vocals, and sometimes it can just be that your vocalist is not as seasoned, is not a very seasoned vocalist, technique wise. I would just go back to an SM58, and like you said, as a rule of thumb, SM58, Beta 58, actually not even the Beta 58, SM58, I'd say. And for but the thing is with what I found about the KSM-8 is that singers that are not very technique wise correct, I actually find that the KSM-8 really works for them, because they're not struggling with position of the mic, and you can bring the mic back a couple of inches and tonally it still stays the same. And I think that's the game changer when it comes to singers. As far as volume on stage, mate, that's I mean, you as an engineer need to be the best judge of that. If you are struggling with it to an extent, shift to something that works. Or if you're aware, or the other thing could be if you're aware of the mic's polar pattern. If you're aware of the mic's polar pattern, then just make sure that you position the wedges accordingly. Because one of the biggest mistakes I see, especially with using like a supercardioid mic, is that the wedge is in the wrong space, and the wedges might be right in front of the singer where they should actually be towards the side in the rejection zone. So something similar even with using cardioid mics. Actually, you have to be careful about how wide the wedges are placed, because once they start coming into the cover angle of the microphone, you could have trouble. So in my opinion, the best place to put wedges for a cardioid microphone is right behind the mic, and if you're using supercardioid, then to the sides at a 50-60 degree odd angle would be best. I hope that
is
answers
correct.
the
Thank you
question.
very much, Fally. Thank you very much, Fally. Yeah, one thing I could add to this is that one of the common mistakes that people do with the KSM-8 is that they use it the same way they use an SM58. is that whenever you get a guy who's a backing singer or another backing singer, you start giving them KSM8 because it's a great microphone. But we need to always remember that KSM8 is a good lead singer microphone because that is the guy that you want to have the least processing on. But when it comes to backing vocals, this is where you give them I don't want to say the average in a bad way. Don't get it wrong. I'll just give him a standard workhorse. So it could be a Beta 58 or a SM58. And obviously, because the KSM8 can take the vocalist an extra mile. If you're in a small stage, just like we mentioned earlier, it's gonna you shoot yourself in the foot. It's too sensitive that it picks up. It literally it deals with proximity. It's a microphone that just defies the rules of physics in terms of proximity, which means when you get too close to the microphone, you get a bassy effect, and when you step slightly away from the microphone, you have a big loss in the signal. So the KSM8 gives you a wider sweet spot, but that means also that it might be picking up more leaks, which limits your dynamic range. So I would not suggest using a KSM8 anytime you have somebody on stage. Give it to your lead singer if the stage has a nice space enough and the SPL level on the stage is reasonable. Whenever you use more wedges, definitely the KSM8 is not going to help you much. One thing also I'd like to add on the KSM8 is that people who have habits of slightly holding the mic off axis. So when I'm holding the mic this way, I mean, this is the camera here. I'm holding the mic on axis directly this way. This is perfect. But if somebody's using the mic this way with the KSM8, you start getting more blows, more puffing, more popping on the mics than you expect. It's based on the way the microphone is manufactured because there is a coin on top or like a shield on top, and the place that it allows the air to flow in is actually from the side. It's literally from that part here. So if the guy or the singer is not really knowing how the microphone works and he holds the microphone this way, because it actually works and the proximity effect on the microphone is quite good that it actually still works, but it starts to get more poppy this way. So this is one thing as well that you need to always remind the singers, like, yeah, this microphone is great, but please, you need to make sure that you hold it this way, or you just keep it on the stand and just kind of make sure it's on axis. It gives you flexibility in terms if you're singing long notes, then you have the flexibility to do whatever you want. But if it comes to a part where you have plosives in and you're not holding it on axis, you might get more popping on the microphone. So this is something just to kind of seal the deal on that.
Mate, talking about, let me add something to that. Talking about holding the mic on access. For any of you guys that are interested in seeing how far you can actually hold a KSM8 and sing, please go to YouTube and check out some of Mr. Rahman's videos, and you'll be shocked. There are times when the mic is like 1.5 feet away, but it is absolutely on axis. And I think that's what surprised me the most, because he has that habit of pulling the mic back when he's projecting, and not pulling the mic back a few inches. Sometimes he's pulling the mic back like, it's 1.5 feet away. And for I mean, that's the weirdest thing. Like, as long as it's on axis, I can still hear him out in the front. And we're talking about events where there are 15, 20, 30,000 people in front of the stage. So it's not to have a mic to get you out of trouble like that. It's a game. I don't think we'll be going
where you
back
don't
to
need to push
anything
the
else.
fader to compensate.
No, you don't have to push the fader.
Exactly.
So the only
Yeah.
thing to him was, yeah, you do that. Just make sure you're holding the mic on axis and project, and it's incredible, absolutely incredible.
Very nice.
I wonder if I actually find a. If there are some more questions, I'll go and look for a little picture of it to just show you, because that will actually reinforce how far back he holds it. Otherwise, you guys can just head over to YouTube and Google it. You'll find something definitely.
I've seen a similar example with it was a ceremony in Nigeria, and I was in the broadcast room, and the pastor was literally holding the mic in the middle of the ceremony. He was holding it here, that way, and I was in the broadcast room. I was like, wow, the microphone is not even pointing to him. It was like literally on the side, and he was talking. I was hearing clearly, and my colleague who was an engineer, I was actually telling him about the microphone the day before. He said, everything you said yesterday was okay, but he said everything changed right now when I just saw this. He said this is unbelievable. And yeah, that is true. But again, this is one of the things that you need to also know when you're on a small stage. It does not help you this way. So yeah, absolutely. If you're doing front of house for a medium to small stage, I would say maximum one mic for a lead singer, but don't cross that number. If you're on a big stage, then you can have two lead singers with a KSM8. You're still okay. Yeah. Do we have any more questions? Do we need to do a an
Nope,
auction
no
sign?
questions.
Going once, going twice. Well, obviously, this is not the last webinar. This was just the introduction. I kept it very simple, kind of breaking the ice style. There's plenty of things that we're going to be talking about. I mean, I tried as much as possible to keep it very non-technical today, just for the reason to keep the room for people who are joining for the first time into this industry or starting to kind of get into the recording for the first time as an artist. But I promise you that we will go in details down the line. We have a very busy we have very busy topics to talk about. Some of them are very controversial. A lot of the engineers who are in the room might think, "Oh no, but I think it's the other way around." I totally respect you. There is no one size fits all. We might do things similarly and completely the opposite. Doesn't mean you are wrong and I'm right, or I'm wrong and you're right. It's the same way that we do our cuisines at home. You like it a bit salty, you like it a bit chili. People in India, they don't have the same biryani anywhere. You go to Mumbai, it's different than Delhi. You go north, it's different than south. Doesn't mean it's wrong, doesn't mean it's right. Everybody does it differently. But what we try to do, we try as much as possible to cover the average users. What is it made for, and how does it change the outcome in terms of sound? And we will demo that to you. And by demoing it to you, at least your ears will get used to what does it sound like when you use X, Y, or Z tools added on the microphone. Even when we're talking about proximity or talking about the angle of the microphone or talking about the standard microphone behavior. I mean, uh, one thing I can assure you with our products as a Shure products that we make sure of the consistency of polar patterns. And when I say polar patterns, we're going to talk about that in details. But when I say if this guy is an angry person and I say he's always angry, that means he's consistent. He's always angry. That is his pattern. So when I'm talking about our microphones, when you're talking about a polar pattern that has a frequency response at a certain, let's say, bandwidth, Shure respects that, let's say, to the farthest means possible. And that means when we say we have the most consistent polar pattern possible against a lot of the microphones on the market, we literally mean that. Now, this gives you a lot of insight on how much can I take the microphone off axis and how much would I keep and how much would I lose. And this is very important when it comes to recording, because one of the first measures to kind of change the tone without playing much with the phase is actually deciding what angle am I going to use the mic with. And we'll talk about that, and we'll let you hear that with instruments, and you'll be surprised, like, whoa, I didn't know that just starting from the microphone level, I can play with tone before I even go into EQs and compressors and so on and so on, which we will cover as well. So thank you everybody for sticking out today. I hope it was nice and sweet for everybody. Feel free to reach out to us. We have a support email, which is support at sorry, it's what's called, it's off my head.
Yeah, I can give them our
Info,
email. It's
if you want. You can go for info at Miasa support. Sorry, Miasa support at shure.com. That was it. Yes. or you can just go to Shure Mia website and you can find the emails down there. Also, please follow our channel on YouTube. Just type in Shure Mia. You'll find our channel on YouTube with all the latest videos, probably recordings of previous sessions that we did, workshops that we used to do in the old days. Now it sounded like drama a bit, but yeah, hopefully everything will be good again. And final message: just stay safe and enjoy your time as much as you could. Again, thank you, Fali, for being here. Looking forward for the next
Most
one.
welcome. Most enjoyed. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being here. So thank you, everybody, and signing off. See you.